Hey everyone, so in this video I'm going to show you how to draw a sunflower, and we're going to do a pencil sketch and then we're going to ink it with this green Sharpie. So my first tip is to pay close attention to the negative space. And so negative space when you're talking about drawing is the area around the object. So like this is all negative space. And this can help you because it helps you sort of identify the shape better. So, you usually will take, your first pass at drawing the positive object, but then when you look at these areas like that, you can kind of double check to see if what you did is correct. My second tip for when you're doing your pencil sketch is to use the side of the pencil. So this side here, like that, as opposed to the tip, right? So the tip would be like this if I'm going like that. The side would be this. So you'll notice that this is kind of like almost like just like grazing the paper, and I barely use any pressure when I'm doing that. The reason that this is important is that if you need to actually erase, it becomes really easy to do so. So I try not to spend much time erasing because it just kind of like, it makes kind of a mess of the paper and it bogs you down. Because I know that as I go over things, I'm going to make things more carefully drawn and more correct as I go. So I'll start by just quickly sketching. And then as I'm looking more closely, I'll see, oh, this is, maybe a little bit more like that. And I'll sort of start to change things around and make little modifications as I go with my drawing. But again, keep using the side of your pencil, not the tip of it. My third tip, as you're in the sketching phase of the drawing before you add your pen, is to start thinking about how loose or how tight you want your drawing to be, right? So sometimes I'm sure, if you've followed my channel, you've seen that sometimes I draw really tight and, more like this, right? You're kind of like this and you're being really careful. And then other times, see, I'm using my whole arm, right? Like my whole hand is moving around. And that makes you more gestural and more loose. So it's not so much that one is better than the other. It's just that you want to be thinking about what you're actually trying to accomplish in the way that you're trying to describe whatever you're drawing, in this case, a sunflower. So now when it comes to using pen and ink, a few things to think about, right? So one thing that you want to think about is your line speed. So in this, notice how my line speed is pretty quick. I'm almost like flicking my hand when I start close to the middle part of the sunflower, and then I'm just going over it. So I'm building up contrast, but I'm also using a pretty quick mark. And so think about that with your drawing. Like when you draw, do you draw really slow or really fast? And it's not that one is better than the other. It's just that they're different and they're going to give different types of marks. So that's just something to pay attention to. And I recorded recently a whole nother video on this topic. And so in the description, I'll link back to that video if you haven't seen that one. And so this is something that I cover a lot in my pen and ink course because I go over a lot of basic techniques that you can use in your drawing. And a lot of times it's simple fixes that people just like, when it's your own drawing, you don't always see the things that need to be fixed to get a better drawing or just to expand your skills, right? So maybe you're doing really well, but you want to take it a little bit further. So those are a few things that I cover in my course, which is also in the description. Now, as far as technique goes for this one, the two main things that I'm really focused on is having a lot of contrast where I have really dark darks near the center of the flower, and then I'm not overdoing it at the outer parts of the leaves. So I'm kind of like adding a lot of pen to the center area, and then at the edge of the petals I have a good amount of pen, but then in the middle part I have almost nothing there. And so what that does is it gives a little bit more of a sense of like the texture and the contrast. So that's another thing that if you're, look at your drawing, and sometimes what people do when they're drawing and they're adding ink to it is they sort of start filling it in completely. And what you want to do instead is you want to think about using the pen more to shape the form than to say like color it in. So I think a lot of times people, they think back to, if you think back to when you're a kid and you're drawing, you maybe you draw a pencil sketch and then you fill it in, right? That's how people make work or draw when they're little a lot of the time. And you want to get out of that habit because when you're drawing an object, what you're doing is you're using your pen to more describe the object, to show form of the object, not just to fill in sections. The other thing always to keep in mind when you're drawing is, let's say you're drawing a sunflower, you don't need to draw the entire thing all the same. So these petals down here, maybe I'll just give a little bit more of a hint of as opposed to the first few that I did where I went over them a little bit more in like a more of a detailed way. So sometimes it's nice, a good thing to practice or try is just sort of like not overdoing it. See how few lines you actually can do to give kind of a hint of the object. And like sometimes when people do stuff with pen, they tend to overwork it. I do that a lot too. I'm guilty of that for sure, of just kind of going over and over it. And so sometimes practicing just kind of like an economy of lines, the fewer lines the better, can be a good thing to experiment with and practice. And another thing that I sometimes see people do in their drawings is they start with their pencil sketch, which is fine, and then they feel like they have to erase the entire pencil sketch and then sort of like go over it with ink. You don't need to do that. You can actually just keep your pencil sketch there and then go over it, right? So I actually recommend doing that because if you go over it with the eraser, you kind of make a lot of smudges in your paper and it just doesn't look very good. So if you're doing that, just try experimenting with putting your pencil sketch down, but just not erasing it all, and see what you think of that. Okay, so last thing we're going to do is we're going to make this darker part that's in the center part of the sunflower. Now, if you've ever looked really closely at the center part of the sunflower where all the seeds are, you'll notice that there is a lot going on there and a lot of detail. And this is where this idea of just like interpreting what you're drawing comes in, right? Because when you're drawing, you're not really trying to create like a one-to-one thing between what you're drawing and your actual drawing. You're not taking a photograph, you're making a drawing of it. So it's an interpretation of whatever you're drawing. And so sometimes when people draw, they do try to draw like, maybe every single seed, and every single detail. But what you can also do is just give an impression of what you're drawing. And so you want to still capture some of the texture and maybe some of the details, but you don't have to feel like you ever have to sit there and draw every single seed that's in the middle part of the sunflower. So that's kind of how I'm approaching this. And I've talked about this in a lot of other videos, that a lot of times, think about how tight do you want the drawing to be, how loose or gestural do you want it to be. And in this, I want to make sure for sure that there is a different texture in the middle part than the petals. Like I don't want it to be like, oh, it's exactly the same. But I also, I definitely didn't want to sit there for like hours drawing every single seed. And some artists do that, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But in this, I'm more going for just the general impression of the texture than feeling like I have to go with every little detail that I see. So if there are other types of flowers that you're interested in having me draw and do a tutorial on, let me know that in the comments. So far, I think I've done a rose and a calla lily. So I think this is the third flower that I've drawn on the channel. So if there's other types of flowers you're interested in seeing, let me know. And if you want me to do more content like this, let me know. I could also show you, some other ways to draw sunflower, sort of like taking the same topic and trying to draw it different ways can be also a good thing to do, especially if you're someone who's like debating what to draw. Sometimes people struggle with that, like, what do you draw? You can take the same object and draw it in a lot of different ways, and it can kind of like stretch your skills in different ways, which is good to do. So thanks again for watching. If you are new here, please do subscribe. If you're returning, always putting a comment helps me a lot. It really helps get it out to more people, and I will see you soon. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye.